Good morning, everyone. I'm Eddie Brill, the host of OG Talk, OG for Organic Grill. I say good morning. You might be night for you, but for us, we're crack of dawn on a Monday morning. And I have with me the owner of the Organic Grill, my friend, my brother, not only the owner, but my co-host, Vlad Grinberg. And there's Vlad right there. He didn't say much at the beginning, but wait till we start moving. He'll start talking. And a very dear friend of mine is our guest today. We've known each other for a very long time. Friends with his family, so it's more like a big family show. The host of Tell Me Everything on Sirius 121, and an all-around, incredible guy who's takes on the media, the politics, the hard subjects. My friend John Fugelsang is our guest. Good morning, John.
Thanks, Vlad.
Yes, and it's good. It's good to have you here in the morning. It's interesting. When I was working for the David Letterman show, he very rarely was interviewed. He mostly did the interviews. Mm-hmm. When he was being interviewed by people, he would take over the interview and try to interview the interviewers. Mm-hmm. How often do you, because you're interviewing every day, how often do you get interviewed?
Quite a bit. I mean, quite a bit. I'm always promoting stuff. When you're a comedian, you're always going on other people's shows to promote things or going on TV shows. So I get interviewed quite a bit, but usually the interviews aren't about me. They're about subjects. I think back to that episode of Letterman where Johnny Carson was a guest in the 80s on Late Night, when Johnny came out with a fold-up piece of wood and it unfolded to be his own desk. And he sat there with a desk next to Letterman and said, David, it's impossible to talk to anyone without this. But it's more fun to be interviewed than to be the interviewer.
Yeah, how much work do you, the show is on, it's called Tell Me Everything. First of all, the history of the name is important to me that I didn't know until our terrific crew came up with the research. I had no idea that Tell Me Everything was a Bob Dylan reference.
Well, I had never done my own radio show before, and I'd been offered political radio shows, but I'd always wanted to avoid doing just politics. And when this channel, Insight, was started, it was going to be very eclectic.
And our friend started...
Pete Dominic.
Pete Dominic started the Insight Network, asked you to join.
Yeah. And I wanted to convey that it wasn't just, DC, and my wife said you should have the word everything in the title, because we wanted to have comedians and talk about politics and religion and have celebrities and rappers and rock stars and filmmakers and talk about family, sex, relationships, astrology, science, tech.
Everything.
So there was this interview magazine conversation with Bob Dylan back in the 80s. And they said to Bob, what's your advice for a woman going on a date with you? And he said, tell me everything. And that just kind of seemed like the right thing. And that's what I tell my callers whenever they call in as well.
Yeah, tell you everything. So now you've been doing the show over there, I think it's like 4 years
4 years.
And but it's kind of changed. You moved to earlier in the day. How does that change for you?
Moving earlier in the day was interesting because it gave us a whole new set of callers, and it actually made the show have to be more energetic. In the late afternoon, it was kind of more lugubrious, and we could take our time. And we still sit down and we'll do long 30-minute interviews with people, sometimes an hour. When it moved to earlier in the day, it just got a bit more caffeinated, and that just kind of was the right tone for it.
Now, you're talking a lot about politics. It comes up often. Mm-hmm. And not many comedians attack politics because, well, first of all, you write a joke about what happened today, and then tomorrow things change.
Yeah.
So what interested you in doing a political comedy bent?
Well, it's a great question, Ed, because you know this. Going into political stand-up is maybe the dumbest creative discipline you can enter. Please do anything. Puppet shows, sing scat, kabuki, no theater. There's so much you can do creatively with your time.
I tried kabuki. It's just the makeup kept falling
I tried
off.
Kabuki. They said I was too pale, so that was awkward. The mime school, too. But you do political comedy. A, you're going to alienate half your audience before you open your mouth. B, your material's going to be dated in 2 weeks. Although, hey, I got a box of Mitt Romney jokes in my attic. I can finally bring them down. And three, you can't get on late night talk shows doing political comedy, because the only people who can go on a TV show doing political comedy are people who already have their own show. They just don't book you for it. So, but
yeah,
my
a lot
dad,
of the comedians in the Letterman days, they'd say no political comedy.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a couple of comics that went on and did it anyway and were never invited back.
I only got into it because of George Carlin. And George Carlin's take on politics, when I was a kid and I saw him live for the first time on what became the Jammin' in New York album, which I think is his best album.
Where did they film that?
I'm not sure where it was filmed. I saw it at, they filmed it at the Beacon Theater. I saw it at Westbury Music Fair on Long Island. And my friends all took me, and I thought it was George Carlin, Dirty Jokes. And that was the album.
Did it spin around at that time?
No, that was the 80s.
Okay.
But this was the one where he said he stopped being a comedian and became an essayist. And Carlin always said 91, the Persian Gulf War album, Jamming in New York, and followed by Back in Town, were the two records he thought were his best, where he stopped being a joke teller and became a person who came out and did essays with jokes in them. And it was very influential on me. And my dad was a history teacher, and I sucked at sports. So,
That's the only option, right?
Going after hypocrisy and politics and religion was a way to earn his distant love. So, I do lots of goofy stuff. I had a child just for the material. I was too sick of politics, so I had a baby just to
No,
get
it's
new
very
jokes.
smart. And an excuse to have sex again.
Because that's what babies do.
Yeah.
No, actually, the family is the leading cause of sex. Sex is the leading cause of no family. I got it backwards, so sorry.
Yeah.
Family is the leading cause of sex. Sex is the leading cause of family. Family is the leading cause of no sex. It's
sex.
Monday morning.
Yes.
My Adderall tea hasn't kicked in yet.
Now, here's an interesting thing. I'm sitting here with Vlad, who's from Russia, was born in Russia, and when he's growing up...
I wasn't even born in Russia. I was born in USSR, which is
Right.
two different things now.
you don't know how lucky you are.
I was
Vlad.
in Ukraine.
Yeah,
In Ukraine, I caught that,
and
by
the
the way.
Ukraine girls really knocked him out. When you grew up, you never said. What was your thought about politics as a kid? Differently than kids that grew up in the
It
United
was
States?
such a dichotomy. Whatever people say, it's not what they think, and it's so obvious at the time when I was growing up. It was like one thing you can talk at home, and parents always tell you, don't say it outside. Like it's such a schizophrenic mentality.
What was your father's take on what was going on?
My father
in the
was a very different man. He passionately hated the system and everything he was doing all his life, and was kind of not what everybody thought. And we have a history in our own family. I told you about, like my grandfather, which I never saw. He was an officer, and he was actually taken away for unknown reason. And some of the people thought that he was telling jokes that had a political content. And then my grandmother never saw him, and she was raising two kids by herself. And then when we were about to immigrate, like in 90s, we got a letter that he's rehabilitated, but we never thought what he was there for and what happened to him. There was no, he just disappeared basically.
Yeah, as opposed to as an American kid, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can't talk about. You get in trouble for talking about, but we have the dichotomy, as he says, is that we can talk about it. So when you're growing up,
openly, it's not a big deal.
right?
It's a great example of how, for all of our complaints and gripes, we are extremely privileged and blessed. My wife just got back from Ukraine. My wife was in Zaporizhia, and the war is 5 miles away. And everyone in the workplace where she was just like, oh, do you want to go past the war later? Because they just know that there's a war zone 5 miles away from the office, and they go to work every day.
Yeah. So you're growing up, and you're in this household. Your parents. It's been documented a lot about your mother being a nun and your father being a Franciscan. I guess Franciscan is the way to describe it. Not from San Francisco. He's
that's my
he
wife.
might have visited there.
That's my wife, yeah.
And
my mother was a sister, my father was a brother, and I'm the whitest guy in all of New York.
so your life, you're growing up in this house, and what was religion like growing up in a house of religious folks?
I've never been asked that question.
Okay.
It was very strange because my parents were the most Catholic parents in my neighborhood. We were the only kids that went to church every Sunday, every holy day, grace before every meal. They didn't make us do confession. They didn't really put a lot of stock in the Pope. They kind of thought the Pope was a clown, and they were always saying we're praying for a better Pope.
Interesting. Yeah.
And my dad was not just non-racist, he was anti-racist. He had pictures on the wall of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. He gave me a copy of Malcolm X when I was a kid. And yet he was very conservative in his dress and demeanor. He was a principal in a high school, but politically and socially, he was a real social justice, Jesus Democrat. And so I was the only kid whose parents made him go to church all the time, and the only kid whose parents voted against Reagan. And that was very confusing for me as a kid. And as I got older, it actually made incredible sense and made me respect my parents a lot more. To be the most liberal and the most Christian at the same time, it takes a while to figure out why that makes sense.
And when you're a kid growing up and you're joking with your friends and stuff, do you have a lot of political friends? What got you into the politics?
It was really my dad. When I was a little kid, my dad. I'll never forget. I loved Star Wars. Star Wars became like my real religion for a whole generation of American boys. Star Wars replaced organized religion. It was a lot like Jesus and God with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
Right.
The father is more powerful, but the son, not a dick. And so then they had Battlestar Galactica, which was the TV ripoff of Star Wars, and it was like a Xerox of my religion. And my dad wouldn't let me stay up to watch the premiere. And I said, all the other kids their dads are letting them stay up. Why can't I? I have the worst dad. I don't care. You're going to sleep. Because I had a principal for a dad. It was horrible.
Oh, right.
I'm in bed. My mom was working nights. Like 10 o'clock at night, my dad pulls me out of bed. I'm like, what? He goes, I want you to see something on the TV. And I'm like, oh, my dad's great.
Finally.
He's letting me watch my show. But instead, he wanted me to come in and watch the late news with him because they were showing what happened that day, which was Jimmy Carter signing the Camp David Peace Accord with Israel and Egypt. My father couldn't believe an American Christian president had helped bring peace to a corner of the Middle East, and he wanted his kid there to witness a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew embracing. I had no idea what was going on. Moshe Dayan had an eye patch. I thought that was cool. But I looked at my father's face, and I saw how happy he was, and I knew that this was more important than Battlestar Galactica.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of made me realize, okay, this is something that's calling me, and I never forgot the moment. And the next day at school, every kid knew about Galactica. I was the only kid who knew about Camp David and Menachem Begin.
Right.
And that's sort of, with that kind of dysfunction, you either break from it or you run to it. And, when my mom gave me permission to talk about how she had been a nun on stage, it opened up a big floodgate of material and led to me doing a lot of the stuff I do now.
You went on a tour at one point. I know some of the people who did it, called the Coexist Tour, which reminds me of what your story is. Explain that and how that worked and how people responded to it.
Well, that was a tour that I wasn't even a part of. They had this tour, and it was like a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, an atheist. I guess
Walk into a theater.
Yeah, a Buddhist, a
That's like a
Zoroastrian.
good start of a story.
Yeah, I don't make fun of Scientologists or their beard wives. Never. But and then their Christian somehow ran afoul of the production. He got a job, or he made someone angry, and he left. And so the documentary they were making about the Coexist Tour turns into a nationwide search for America's next top funny Christian. And they came to me, and I'm like, okay, I talk about Christianity and comedy, but I'm not what you call a Christian comic.
Right.
I don't work clean. I go after conservative, right-wing, fundamentalist Christianity. Very pro-God, pro-Jesus, but I love how Jesus did the magic tricks. I love all the great Jew magicians, Houdini, what have you. But the calling out the hypocrites was my favorite thing Jesus did. But they had me do it. Elaine Boozler did an introduction. They filmed it here in Stand-Up New York, and I got to be the closing act on a tour that I never even saw. But a lot of great comics are in the film. Moshe is in it, and so I did a whole thing about...
Not Moshe Dayan.
Not Moshe Dayan, no,
Yeah.
Moshe Kasher.
Right.
And I did a whole thing about, how homophobia is against the teachings of Jesus, talking about who actually wrote the Bible, who Jesus really was, and that's kind of inflammatory to some people, but I just got tired of not hearing my point of view ever expressed on TV.
We're taught a foundation. Sometimes it's leaky, sometimes there's no foundation in the foundation we're taught. And then when people hear the truth, they don't want to believe the truth because it's going to destroy what that stand that they're standing on. And it's so as a comedian who talks about politics, who has a show, who has millions of followers, what is it like for you for the anger that comes across? How does that feel?
You mean the anger I receive?
The anger you receive. Yeah, a lot of times you'll get phone calls when I'm on your show and people aren't happy because, people really get personal about politics. And despite the fact that we don't really control a lot of what goes on in the world, people have a hard time letting go of control. So I think there's a lot of anger there. What's your opinion on the anger?
I think you're right. I do think you're right, and I think there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of misdirected anger. We've all seen, one of the main jobs of politicians is telling people who to blame, besides them, and that's always very effective. And when you have areas with poverty and low education and a lack of, shall we say, social justice, and there's anger and rage in a society, and then you get a charismatic politician or a charismatic religious figure to come in and tell people who to blame for your problems, whether it's the Klan or the Taliban or the white supremacist shooters, you're going to see some violence take place. And, for me, like, I believe all that Jesus stuff. I believe all that empathy, compassion, love, forgiveness, be kind to each other. I go after people in power viciously, but one of the things I try to do, that I've always tried to do, I haven't been perfect, but I try to only go after those in power, not the ones who've been suckered. Now, I will go after meanness. If you've been suckered and mean, and you're mean to somebody, I'll go after you for being a bully. But generally, I try to just attack those in power, because you know this, you talk about this. All the great comedy punches up. You've got to be the one going after the status quo, and all of the great politicians and comedians are the ones who have taken on the status quo. If you're defending the status quo and attacking those below you, or trying to go after those who want to change the system for the better. I mean, you see comics, these young guys who get up there and they do material about homeless people or developmentally disabled people, and they'll say retard on stage, or like Obama, he tried to give health care to poor people. How do you make fun of that?
Well, Greg Giraldo, the great comedian Greg Giraldo, had told me, we were working together in Mystic, Connecticut. I remember doing a gig, and he was so smart, so brilliant. He was a lawyer and a brilliant guy, and a lot of the comedians I've known in my life are some of the smartest people I know. And he was talking about homeless people. You never make fun of homeless people. You make fun of the people who are affected by the homeless people. Because there's nothing funny about a homeless person.
The meanness. I mean, but then sometimes you'll be in a club and there'll be some low wattage comic on stage and everyone's drunk, and they will make fun of homeless people.
Right.
Or they'll do retard jokes.
Right.
And I hate that word. And people will laugh if they're drunk enough for 2 minutes, and then they feel dirty. And we're in a time now when politicians are going lowbrow to see how much it works.
Yeah.
And it has helped. The absence of empathy is seen as strength by some people.
Yeah, because they talk about the lowest common denominator, and the lowest common denominator means there's the bigger group of people in that lowest common denominator. How has it changed? When we were kids, or when I was a kid, I loved The Life of Brian, Monty Python movie. It was smart and terrific, and there were hypocrites who were making fun of the film.
They banned it.
Yeah, and banning it and actually making it more popular. But how is it different back in, say, the 70s as it is now, talking about politics? Is there a difference?
I think a huge difference. I mean, in terms of stand-up, we still have that kind of playing field. You can still have a Richard Pryor or George Carlin ascend right now, and we still have people like that. But in terms of
Dave Chappelle.
Sure, yeah. In terms of popular entertainment, it's very different. I don't think the Jeffersons could get on TV today. Not on broadcast.
And I understand why, but explain your thinking behind that.
I think a lot of things changed in the 1980s, and I think that...
Like what?
I think that when the 1970s was a rough era to be an American, but it was a great era for art. And rough eras for societies are usually great eras for art. And so we think of the grittiness of the 70s. The whole post-war bucolic view of America as the promised land is shattered, and you have the rise of the angry 70s anti-hero in cinema, like De Niro and Pacino and Nicholson and Hoffman. Movies take on a darker tone. I mean, the decade begins with the Mafia winning Best Picture with The Godfather, and ends with divorce and Vietnam winning Best Picture with Kramer versus Kramer and The Deer Hunter. We got more serious. And then when Ronald Reagan took over, and I was just a kid, this whole new era of candy-colored happiness begins that was rather synthetic, and pop culture supported it, and it was where we were. And there was still tons of great art and great cinema in the 80s, but it was the Cosby Decade. And we know the Cosby Decade was really built on an image that wasn't built on reality.
Right, but I think every generation has that.
Sure.
In the 60s you had... the Jefferson Airplane, and then you also had, yummy, 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 I got love in my tummy. There's, You know, there's that saccharin, but sometimes it fills a need for people who can't handle the truth.
And I like that too. I like both. I mean, you need a spoonful of sugar. You know, if you just are consuming raw truths from Lewis Black and Bill Hicks and George Carlin and Richard Pryor all day, you're going to be the least funny guy on the lineup. And anger doesn't help comedy. Outrage helps comedy. I don't think anger does.
Now,
So political correctness changed the humor now?
that's a
great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't understand what political correctness is anymore. I used to think it was just using language to redress grievances and not be a dick. And I know it goes too far, but I always thought political correctness was just trying to get better as a culture and be less hurtful in the words we use. But I know it goes. I was on VH1 once, and I referred to Naomi Campbell as a beautiful black supermodel, and I got yelled at. And they said, call her African American. And I said, she's British.
Yeah.
So
she's not an African American.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that intention means a lot. And if you're trying to do stuff that's mean, that's your intention. If you're doing something edgy, but it's for a more loving, compassionate end, I think you get away with a lot.
Because words are just the costume of intention. If you say honey, like, to your loving child or family member, hey, honey, can you hand me that, cup of coffee or whatever? It's a sweet thing, but you go, hey, honey, give me a call. You're the dick who's, using it.
But I also think that somebody is getting a benefit from it, using a political correctness term, because now you can go to the edgy stuff. You can't do this. You can't do that. Right? You kind of setting the boundaries. You definitely going above and beyond, address it. But for some people who just want to have a comfortable career, right? That just shows where you don't have to go, right?
Yeah, but I do think that there's one thing that conservatives and liberals really have in common in America right now, which is that all sides are addicted to umbrage. We love being offended. Oh my God, conservatives and liberals, come on. That's the one. Love being offended.
We all want Don Rickles.
You said that, I'm outraged.
We all want Don Rickles to call us a hockey puck.
Yeah. So it's like, I think that if you're a mean person, that's going to come through in the material.
Yeah.
And that's what audiences turn away from. But then that's being mean to marginalized peoples. That's why I say all the time, like, you call yourself a Christian, but you're voting to turn away war refugees. You're voting to turn away the Christian refugees at our southern border fleeing our own drug war violence. You're voting to make the rich richer. You're voting to bring back torture. Where's the Jesus part in all this?
Yeah.
So, like, I'll call out hypocrisy, but I know that if I hate those people, that's just going to make them hate me back. And if I hate them, I can't be funny.
It's like war.
Wow.
You can't.
That's true.
It's like you want to have a win-win situation, and that's should be in my opinion, the outcome of any kind of a conversation, discussion, or fight. You win-win at the end. But if you just if someone heckles me in the audience and I just shit on them, it's no one's going to evolve. It's not going to evolve into a positive scenario.
That's a very wise bodhisattva level of comedy wisdom, though. A lot of comedians takes decades to realize that.
Yeah.
Someone heckles me, I think, oh, a chance to get the audience on my side. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, douchebag.
Well, I learned from watching Paula Poundstone, and she's the best at that, and turning the heckler into her best friend.
Lincoln said the only way to deal with your enemy is to make him your friend. And like, I don't block people on Twitter. I'll try to engage them, but on Twitter you never know when it's a real person either.
Yeah.
But haters are going to hate, and if you're a fully grown adult who goes on the internet and hides his name and face just to hate on people, or you're a fully grown adult and you go into a comedy club and get drunk and heckle an artist just to impress your friends, the problem's you.
But here's the thing: when you heckle at a comedy club, you're there, and but when you're at home behind the computer hiding, and you can say whatever you want and be braver.
It allows cowards to be very brave. Yes.
Yes. Now you've eaten from here before. You know how delicious the food is. As a treat, we're going to bring some food out right now. The wonderful Izzy is going to, and that's one of the best parts of the shows that we get to eat. It's weird because if you laugh, it comes out your nose, but
you can manage that.
Yes.
No, I love it. The East Village is where you find the greatest concentration of healthy restaurants.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is, but there's so many.
Yeah, it's historically.
This place is amazing. I've always loved getting takeout here when I have a show in the area. Thank you, Izzy. I am definitely not worthy. Thank you.
We'll give you a chance.
Yes.
Well, I learned a lot about nutrition from Eddie because
a lot of comedians got a lot of knowledge about nutrition from Eddie. Huh?
Well, I remember when I lived in LA, we went to see a McCartney show one night, and we got out, and my girlfriend said to me, who's now my wife, said, "I think I'm going to be a vegetarian now." And I was terrified. I thought, oh no, who am I going to date? I can't. I'm attached to you. I can't live with a vegetarian. That'll never happen. And now, years later, I'm raising a vegetarian child in New York City.
That's right.
And I'm here, and I'm
Good old Henry Jack.
Yeah.
How's having Henry Jack in your life, your child? Jack is middle name after your father, right?
Very good, yeah. And Henry, after Henry Miller. I figured that would cover the entire spectrum of male behavior. And it's incredible, but I admit I only had him for the material, so that's not a good reason to have a child. I had him first to be the first to board the plane. It seemed a good idea at the time, and now I just use him for jokes.
Do you have enough material from having a child?
We're just starting second grade. I'm just getting warmed up. Wow.
This is one of my favorites. This is the hot potatoes.
Yes, this is
I wanna
loaded
have a piece of
fries.
that.
Loaded
yeah.
fries, it's called.
With
Wow, what's this?
mushrooms and tempeh. And this is cauliflower pops.
Very nice. Wow.
Crusted. Yeah, let's try.
Yeah, let's
Brilliant.
go in here.
Thank you.
While we're serving each other, your childhood was very interesting. You had mentioned the word retarded and how much it makes you sad. And I'm very politically correct, but that word freaks me out. You have a little bit of a history where when you were a child, unbeknownst to you and your parents at first, that these people wanted to put you in a class of slower.
I was diagnosed mentally retarded, yes. As an infant.
How did it come about?
I don't know. My mom didn't tell me until I was in my 30s.
Wow.
When I was
I'd get
7,
chills on that.
when I was an infant, they told my dad, the teacher, and my mom, the nurse, that I would be special ed for life.
And what did your mom? Well, first of all, what was your reaction right away?
Well, I was
I'm
a
gonna give you
little
some of
kid.
this
I never
to
knew.
try
Thank
this
you.
right
I'll try a
away.
little bit of this. And when I was 7, they thought I had a brain tumor. I was a difficult child. But
Right.
so when my child was born and he was learning delayed and speech delayed. Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is my favorite. This is the breakfast burger. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking about serious stuff and food's coming
Yeah,
in.
it's okay. Well, when my kid was deemed speech delayed, I had a lot of faith because I happen to believe that taller kids develop slower and can be kind of slow and clunky. Like every child's body grows at a different size, but the nervous system grows at the same rate. So that's why little kids can be really agile and taller kids can be oafish and clumsy. That's what I was. And like me, my son was spelling before he was talking. So I took it all with a grain of salt and I just thought, okay, let's see. Humans are malleable little monkeys and there's a lot more early intervention now than when I was a kid. So, we got my kid some extra therapy and he entered kindergarten at a second grade reading level. So I took my own experience of being a slow developer and it's led me to have a lot of faith in people and our abilities.
Did your parents treat you differently? Did people treat you differently when you were not developing as fast as everybody else?
I have no memory of it because I was always in regular classes. I was never in special ed. They told my parents I'd be special ed, but then by kindergarten I was able to go to public school, and my son the same.
That's huge.
Yeah, and then I worked in special ed for years. I paid my way through college doing special ed on the weekends and overnights, and so I have a lot of faith in the human ability to grow, and that's
But this just shows how those labels can either push you harder to work on things and your parents move you along and not to focus on your limitation. And some people would just live with this statement and just say, this is what I'm given, this is what I'm going to be carrying all my life. Unbelievable.
It's very true, yeah.
It's very true. Now, it's not all politics with you. You've had an incredible career in music as well. Talking to, the Beatles, a couple of Beatles, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but I was interested when I read how your favorite musician in concert was Leonard Cohen.
Oh, yes.
And Leonard passed, I guess, about a year ago now.
Yes. Well, he actually died the week Trump was elected, 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so he was smart. He did
Leonard Cohen made sure that Trump was only the second most depressing thing that week. It was his final gift to us.
Yeah. So when you're growing up, what's the kind of influence that you had musically, and how has it affected interviewing
That's
these
an
incredible
amazing
musicians?
question, because my parents were not people into popular music. They had gone into the clergy in their teens and had not lived as normal people since the 50s, so their taste had stayed in the 50s. So my first concert was Guy Lombardo. My parents took me to see. I have no memory of it. And my parents loved Perry Como, and who it took me many years to appreciate as a singer. So we listened to Broadway show tunes. It wasn't a lot of popular music. And then it wasn't until I got older and got to college that I really, really got into popular music. And then I sort of became a classic rock fiend. And my first broadcasting job was working for VH1 as a VJ. So they hired me to be a comedian, but then when they realized I was this like savant on the Beatles and classic rock, they wound up having me do all these interviews. And so I wound up having a broadcasting graduate school of interviewing George Harrison and Paul McCartney and Bruce Springsteen and John Fogerty and Robbie Robertson and all these great names.
Tell everyone about the George Harrison thing and how incredible that turned out to be. It was one of a kind. It was the last time he ever did a live
Do you want
show.
to explain what we're having before we do that?
Yeah,
I'm going to dig in.
Vlad, tell John about the food.
So
We'll talk about Harrison.
you're eating green melt and loaded fries. Eddie's just ruined
The
breakfast burger.
Wow.
Okay, and
Nice.
I'm having an omelet.
What is the breakfast burger based in? What is
Okay, so this is, in his case, it's spicy black bean
that? Nice.
patty, our tofu omelet, that is a signature. And what did you ruin? Okay.
I ruined
All right, it was a little bit of avocado, I guess.
This
Yeah.
is amazing. I've been doing the keto diet for a few months, so I'm in a whole
From the
different
country of
level
keto?
of cult now. Yes, yes. And I'm not actually vegan, but I am willing to come over and make you all feel terrible about your choices in life. I'm vegan like 4 or 5 days a week. I try to be,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And your son is vegetarian?
My son's vegetarian.
Wow.
But his mom's vegetarian, and she says if he wants to eat meat, he can eat meat. I'm not going to. He can do what he wants. And so one day he says, I want a hot dog, and she buys him a hot dog on the sidewalk, and I'm like. All these years, you're a vegetarian, and you're so proud of being vegetarian, and now you're letting the kid eat his first meat, and you don't even know there's meat in it. It's a New York City hot dog. We don't even know what's in that.
But it's also, I've always felt that we should teach kids every religion and let them make a choice. So give a kid a choice.
That's what mine did. My dad, we had, my mother lived in Africa, so we had African artifacts all over the walls, and my father taught Buddhism, and we lived in Long Island, so it was only Catholics and Jews. I didn't know what a Protestant was until I was a teenager. So I grew up, with this whole image of, the lesson I was taught was that when Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions, that was his way of saying there are so many different ways of being, and that to me is Jesus signing off on diversity. And that you're not all going to be the same, but you're all part of the same family. And that was the kind of religion I got raised in. That where, like, if you hate anybody, you don't get to have Christmas because you're not in the right club for that. And that, if you hate anyone, the problem is with you. And George Harrison was a big figure in that because I was raised really Catholic, and then I kind of branched away from that. And George was someone I always admired because I loved his solo career. He was my favorite of the solo Beatles.
Yeah, me too. I was shocking how that, they used to make fun of him. There was recently Vlad had sent it to me, an audio tape where Lennon, it was around the Let It Be time, and Ringo was in the hospital.
It's an amazing tape, isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah. And, and he records it because he wants Ringo to hear it later.
They're having a meeting.
And they're discussing what they're going to do next.
And it's after they recorded Abbey Road.
Yeah.
And we've always been taught that they were done after
Yeah.
Abbey Road. Like Let It Be was done, they never released it, they did Abbey Road, and that was going to be it. And they're talking about having a Christmas single. So,
yeah. And Lennon was poking fun of Harrison about his previous songs and all that.
Well, McCartney was too, because Lennon was saying he thinks the next album should have 4 Lennon, 4 McCartney, 4 Harrison. Essentially, he wanted to get rid of Lennon and McCartney as a songwriting team because they weren't really doing it together anymore anyway. And Paul was the one who was disparaging George and said, I never liked your songs before this record.
Oh, is that who said
like,
it? Yeah.
"While my guitar gently weeps, Paul." And it's true. When I went to the concert for George in London in 2003 or 2002, McCartney sang All Things Must Pass. And it was the best performance I've ever heard of the song. And I'm like, that's a song you and John kept off the White Album. And now you're like... But George was the first to have a solo #1 and the last Beatle to have a #1 single, Forgot My Mind Set on You, and the last Beatle to have a #1 album.
And the Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah, he had 2 #1 albums at the end. And I admired his spiritual struggle, his spiritual growth, his evolution. The first album I ever got by a solo Beatle as a teenager was Cloud 9. I was really young. So one day I was about to go to London to do a live special with McCartney, and they called me and said, we need you to go to London a day later. I said, oh man, I've never been to England. Why? And they said, we need you here on Wednesday for George Harrison and Ravi Shankar.
All right, I can do
And I
that.
couldn't believe it. So he hadn't done a concert tour in America since the 70s.
Right.
And he was producing the Chance of India record. He was going to come in and talk for like 10 minutes, get a soundbite and leave. And instead, I was the worst interviewer of all time. I asked him so many inappropriate, stupid questions. But I went really deep on spirituality and God and what happens when you die. And he liked that. He hung around for 4 hours.
Wow.
We put a guitar in his hands. One of the guy on the crew's girlfriend had a guitar, and I gave it to George.
Just random guitar. Wow.
I tried
Did
it.
you
I
make
said,
that up at the moment?
yes.
In the interview, yeah.
And Ravi had a sitar. George had nothing. I gave George a guitar if he wanted to play with Ravi. And then George just started strumming. And I just said, play whatever you want. And we just goofed off. And he played 4 songs he had never played live before, including an Indian Vedic chant, a Wilbury song that Dylan had sung, an unreleased song, and All Things Must Pass. And it was amazing. He left. I didn't know when he left it was his last public performance.
Wow.
He never played guitar in public again. And he was diagnosed with cancer a couple of months later. When they first aired it, nobody watched it. And then before he died, I was doing the Montreal Comedy Festival.
Right.
They called me up and they said, hey, will you come back to New York and help us recut this? Because we think George doesn't have much time. And all the religious stuff they took out of the first one, they put back in. So the day George died, they ran around the clock, George and this 26-year-old kid, talking about God and the soul and what happens when you die. And to this day, I'll have straight guys come up to me and hug me and say, that was the most spiritual thing they ever saw on TV. So at the time, it was humiliating because I was a terrible interviewer. And it took about 10 years for it to be a rewarding experience.
Wow.
That's wonderful.
What a great story, yeah?
All right, so let's dig into the food. I want to thank John Fugelsang for coming here and being our guest. It's so easy, you know.
Eddie, I
We're
love
just
you.
hanging
I
out.
love with this man. Can I praise you on your own
No.
show? No, I can't. My mother loved this guy. This guy my mother met him at the Mac Awards, and this guy was such a gentleman. This guy has been a mentor to every comic that matters. This guy has taught more comics than you'll ever see. He's inspired more comics than he'll ever know. And when it comes, he can do anything, and is a master of wordplay and can play to any audience. And it's amazing
Whenever
to
I'm
have
on
you
your
be.
show as a guest, it's the longest intro in the world. I'm
Well,
very humbled by it.
it's my own show. I've never had a show where I can say no to any guests I want. And that means I only have people I really like. So I do long, flowery intros because I like to give love and praise. And this guy
And
is
it's-
inspiring a whole new generation in terms of food and diet because people will give up their religion before they give up their comfort food. But
That's right.
you show the way.
And the show's called Tell Me Everything. It's on channel 121. What time during the day every day?
We're on 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. on the Pacific Coast.
Okay, John Fugelsang, ladies and gentlemen. Let's eat.
Thank you very much.
Vlad, thank you. I'm going to inhale this. I will be Vlad the Inhaler.
Oh,
terrible
very
joke,
nice.
terrible
No,
joke.
but it's a great way to close out the thing.
It was a button, but then I kept talking after.
And now we're gonna have it's just gonna eat, and underneath it is gonna be some kind of
Is this
voiceover or
cashew
something.
cheese? What kind of cheese is this?